They called it a punishment. But what they really did was set her free. They mocked her, judged her, and cast her out because they thought she was too soft for this world. But the girl they threw away? She walked into the dust and built a life more powerful than they could ever imagine. The dirt road stretched out like a forgotten thread in the middle of nowhere. The setting sun dipped low on the horizon, painting everything in a burnt orange glow, the kind that made even sadness look beautiful from a distance. But nothing was beautiful to Clara that day. She sat in the passenger seat of an old, squeaky pickup truck, her hands gripping a single worn suitcase, the only thing she had been allowed to carry. The man driving had not spoken much. Just an old friend of her father's doing a favor. Even if he wanted to say something comforting, he did not know how. Because really, what could he say to a girl like Clara, the one the whole town had mocked, shamed, and finally decided was no longer welcome? She stared blankly out the window, past the cornfields and wire fences, as if the flatland might suddenly open up and swallow her whole. But it never did. Her name was Clara. She was 17. And in the town she was raised in, that name had come to mean one thing: disgrace. It was not always like that. There was a time when she used to hum in school hallways, doodle in the margins of her notebooks, and dream about opening a bakery with her mother. But then her body began to change. She grew bigger, rounder. The whispers started. She should try moving more. She eats too much. She will never find someone. The words clung to her like burrs. Each year they grew sharper. She became quieter, more withdrawn. She stopped raising her hand in class. She stopped dancing at parties. And when her father died, the town seemed to decide once and for all Clara was a burden. A soft-bodied, soft-hearted problem no one wanted to solve. The final humiliation came fast. Her aunt stood in the church lobby one Sunday and declared that Clara needed discipline, that a summer on a farm would teach her what real life looks like. That was how she ended up in the truck, heading toward a stranger's land someone referred to only as a poor old farmer. No one had told her his name. Just that she was being dropped off. As the truck slowed in front of a weathered wooden house with peeling paint and sun-baked shingles, Clara's heart thudded in her chest like a trapped bird. A man stood on the porch. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe in his 30s. His skin was deeply tanned from the sun, his arms strong from years of labor. He had no smile for her. No warmth. Just a nod toward her suitcase and a hand pointing at the porch. Behind him, an older man maybe in his 70s leaned against the railing with quiet, observant eyes and a thick white beard. Clara stepped out of the truck. The air was hot and heavy, clinging to her skin. Her dress stuck to the back of her thighs. Her legs trembled. She wanted to run, to scream, to cry. But she had done all that already. And it had changed nothing. So she lifted her suitcase and walked toward the house. The truck drove away without a word. Life on the farm did not give Clara time to mourn. By dawn she was expected to be dressed and outside, helping with chores. The man's name was Luke. He gave no speeches. No rules. Just tasks. Feed the chickens. Carry the water. Pull weeds. Lift hay bales. Shovel manure. At first Clara failed at everything. Her arms ached. Her back hurt. Her hands blistered. She spilled water. She fell in the mud. She cried in the barn when no one was looking. Luke never yelled at her. He just watched. The old man, his name was Tom, would sometimes hand her a bandage, or a slice of cornbread after a long day. He never asked why she was here. He just looked at her like he already knew. At night, Clara lay on a narrow cot in a dusty attic with a single window. The air was hot. The silence louder than any city noise. She stared at the ceiling and replayed the names they had called her. Lazy. Useless. Fat. Disgrace. Those words followed her everywhere. But slowly something else began to whisper louder than those voices. The rhythm of the land. The breath of the animals. The wind through the crops. The soft murmur of her own breath as she stood a little taller each day. It had been 3 weeks. The blisters on Clara's palms had hardened into calluses. The ache in her thighs and shoulders still lingered, but it no longer defined her. She had stopped flinching when the sun rose, and now she moved toward work like someone who belonged in the morning. She still remembered how she used to hide in bathrooms at school to avoid gym class. How the wooden benches always felt like judgment. How running made her feel like a joke. Now she walked with a steady stride toward the chicken coop every dawn, boots caked in dirt, ponytail messy, shirt damp with sweat before breakfast. Luke still said very little. But now and then he would nod slightly when she got something right. The nod meant more to her than all the hollow praise she had ever heard in her life. She began to memorize the land. Which hens were the loudest. Which fence posts needed repair. which parts of the soil crumbled too dry, and which drank water like thirsting mouths. The world here did not demand perfection. It demanded presence. And for the first time in her life, Clara gave it fully, completely. Evenings were her favorite. After supper, she would sit on the back porch steps with a tin cup of water and watch the sun melt behind the western trees. There was no noise, no judgment, no eyes watching, just fireflies flickering in the field. Tom sometimes joined her. He would sit silently beside her, whittling a stick or smoking his old pipe. One evening he finally spoke. "You're tougher than they said." Clara turned to him, startled. He did not look at her. Just kept carving the wood. She wanted to ask, "Who said?" But she already knew. "They said you'd quit," he continued. "Said you'd beg to go back. But here you are." Clara looked down at her blistered hands. "I did want to quit," she whispered. Tom smiled faintly. "Wantin', to quit and actually quittin', are two different things." And just like that, something cracked inside her. Not in a bad way, not like breaking. More like a shell giving way to breath. One hot afternoon, Luke asked her to ride with him to check the fence line. She climbed into the passenger side of his rusted truck, wiping sweat from her forehead. They rode in silence for a long time. But the drive did not stop after a mile or two. The fields passed endlessly. Corn rows, wheat stalks, patches of sunflowers, groves of pecan trees. The land stretched far beyond what Clara had assumed was the farm. They drove for over an hour. At last, Luke pulled the truck to a stop at the top of a hill. The highest one she had seen yet. Below them, the earth opened into a vast sea of farmland more expansive than she thought possible. Golden in the sunlight. Breathing under the sky. Clara leaned forward in her seat, stunned. This is all yours?" Luke said nothing. Just opened his door and stepped out. She followed him to the edge of the overlook. The wind lifted her hair as she turned in every direction, eyes wide. There were no neighbors. No fences. No end. Just land. Miles and miles of it. "I thought you were just a poor farmer," she finally whispered. Luke's voice was calm, steady. "That's what they said, right?" Clara turned to look at him. He did not gloat. He did not smile. He just looked out over the land, hands in his pockets. "I never cared what they said," he added. "They send people here sometimes thinking it's a punishment. I let them." Clara's mouth was dry. "But why me?" she asked. "Why did you let them send me here?" He paused. "Because I saw the way they talked about you," he replied. "I wanted to see what you would become without their voices in your ear." Her eyes burned with unshed tears. He walked back to the truck. And Clara stood there on the hill that felt like the edge of the world and realized that maybe this was an exile. Maybe it was a doorway. Clara began to rise before Luke knocked on her door. She took on more tasks without being asked. When one of the goats got sick, she stayed up all night feeding it broth and keeping it warm. When the tractor broke down, she fetched the tools and knelt beside Luke, handing him parts. She burned bread 3 times before learning how to bake it right. But on the 4th try, Luke ate the whole slice without saying a word and went back for another. Tom called her little boss one day. She laughed. But it stuck. She started planting flowers along the edge of the house. Painted the barn doors red. Taught herself to mend the scarecrow's shirt with scrap fabric. Her body had not changed in the way magazines would measure. But her posture was taller. Her shoulders strong. Her hands skilled. She did not cringe when she caught her reflection in the window. She looked like someone who belonged in her own skin. In the town they had called her weak. But here in the silence of honest labor and kind patience, Clara had become something else entirely. Rooted. Capable. Free. Clara never asked for praise. But that day when Luke handed her the keys to the grain shed and said, "It's yours to manage," she felt something shift deep inside her. It was not just a task. It was trust. She set about cleaning the shed, organizing sacks of feed by weight and grain type, even labeling jars of seeds. The kind of detail no one noticed except Luke did. Tom noticed too. And one evening, as the sun sank low and the world turned gold, he motioned for her to join him by the old tree stump where he often whittled. "You remind me of someone," he said. Clara sat beside him. "Who?" He paused. "Luke's mother." Clara blinked. "I thought she passed a long time ago," Tom interrupted gently. "But she had the same stubborn fire. Quiet at first. But once it's lit, it does not go out." He reached into his coat and pulled out something small. It was a ring. Simple. Silver. Worn smooth by time. "She gave this to me," he said. "Told me to pass it on when I met someone who could turn dust into a garden." Clara stared at him. I haven't earned that, she whispered. He smiled. You are not here to earn it. You are here because you deserve the chance to see what you can grow. He set the ring in her hand and stood. Clara sat under the tree long after he left, her fingers wrapped around the symbol of something she had never been given before: belief. One morning, a black car pulled into the long dirt driveway, polished, sleek, and completely out of place on the dusty road. Clara was hauling buckets of water from the well when the car doors opened. Out stepped her aunt. Her posture stiff, dress pressed, perfume thick in the air. And behind her, two women from the town, both wearing tight smiles that never reached their eyes. Clara, her aunt said, as if testing the name in her mouth. You look well. Clara straightened. She was covered in dirt, sweat dripping down her back. And yet she felt more dignified than she had in any of her aunt's silk dresses. We were just passing through, the woman continued. Thought we would visit. See how the program worked out. Program. That was what they called it. Luke stepped out of the barn, arms crossed. He said nothing. Clara met her aunt's eyes. You sent me here to be punished, she said quietly. Her aunt's smile faltered. I sent you here to learn, she replied. No, Clara said, stronger now. You sent me here to disappear. The other women exchanged glances. And now you are back, Clara added, not to check on me but to see if the shame wore off. Luke stepped closer. She works harder than anyone here, he said. Takes care of this place like it was her own. So if you came to look for shame, you are on the wrong land. Tom appeared from the side of the house, wiping grease from his hands. The three visitors suddenly seemed very small on that wide, open land. The wind blew Clara's hair across her face. She did not tuck it behind her ear. She did not flinch. She stood in her sweat-soaked shirt and blistered boots like a monument. Her aunt shifted her purse strap. Well, she said with a nervous laugh, we should be going. Luke nodded. I'll walk you out. They left in silence. The dust from their tires faded in the rear view. And Clara did not feel rage. She did not feel vindicated. She simply felt complete. For the first time in her life, she did not need someone else's approval. She had become her own judge. And she had passed. The seasons changed. Clara stayed. She no longer counted the days. The farm had become a part of her. Its breath matched her breath. Its rhythm hers. She planted vegetables in straight rows and watched them grow tall. She sang to the goats when she milked them in the early morning light. The kitchen was hers now. She cooked stew with herbs from her own garden, baked bread that no longer burned, and even stitched new curtains for the window above the sink. She laughed fully, freely. And sometimes, when no one was looking, she danced barefoot across the fields under the starlit sky. Luke said more now. Not much, just enough. You fixed the chicken pen, he'd note. Or, that stew yesterday. Tom said it reminded him of his wife's. Small things. But to Clara, each word was a stone in the foundation of something real. One afternoon, she stood again on the same hilltop where Luke had once taken her. Now she came alone sometimes just to look. The land spread before her, still endless. But now it did not overwhelm her. It welcomed her. And she finally understood what Luke had meant when he said he never cared what people thought. Because when the earth gives you its trust, no human opinion matters. It was late autumn when Luke finally spoke the words Clara had never dared to ask for. They had just finished loading crates of pumpkins for the county harvest fair. Clara's hands were streaked with dirt and her cheeks pink from the crisp air. Luke leaned against the barn wall, arms folded, looking at her the way a man looks at something he respects, not something he owns. Do you know why I said yes? Clara looked up, surprised. To what? To taking you in, he said. She set down the crate she was holding, slowly. The question had hovered at the edge of her thoughts for months. I thought they forced you, she said honestly. Or maybe you felt sorry for me. Luke shook his head. I never feel sorry for someone who is still standing. Clara blinked. Luke exhaled slowly. Tom heard them talking in town, he said. Your aunt. The others. They called you names. Laughed at you. Said you were too soft. Said you'd break. He paused. I've known a lot of people who looked strong and snapped like glass the moment life hit them. But the ones they call soft? They're usually the ones who survive everything. He looked her in the eye. I wanted you to see who you really were away from all that noise. Clara could not speak. Her hands trembled. Not from fear. But from the weight of being seen, really seen for the first time in her life. Luke picked up the last crate and started toward the truck. Before stepping inside, he added one more thing. This farm doesn't break people. It rebuilds them if they let it. And then he was gone. Leaving Clara standing in the golden dust, heart wide open. That winter the first snow came quietly. It blanketed the fields like a second skin, soft and patient. Clara stood at the window one morning, a cup of coffee in her hands, watching the frost kiss the edges of the barn. It had been nearly a year. She no longer felt like a guest on the land. She was its caretaker, its student, its steward. Tom had given her his old journal, filled with cropped notes and stories from the early days. She added her own pages to it, now her handwriting woven into the legacy of the farm. One crisp morning, Luke handed her a document. Property records. Her name written beside his. Co-manager. Inheritor. She stared at it for a long time. "I don't," she began. "You already have," he interrupted. Tom winked at her from his rocking chair. Clara stepped outside, heart pounding. She walked the long familiar trail to the top of the hill. Her boots left soft impressions in the snow. And when she reached the top, she stood still for a long time. The land stretched before her, endless and wild. She thought of the girl who arrived with a single suitcase and 1,000 wounds. She thought of the words that used to define her. And how none of them mattered now. Clara had built something that could not be measured by size or shame. She had built strength in silence. Grown roots where they never expected her to bloom. And now she was not just someone who belonged. She was someone who led. They called her obese. Lazy. Weak. They said she needed to be taught a lesson. But the truth is she was the one teaching them now. Not with revenge. Not with words. But with how she lived. They had sent her away in disgrace. But what they gave her without meaning to was freedom. The freedom to become. And in becoming she did not just rewrite her story. She rewrote what it meant to be underestimated. She rewrote what it meant to endure. She rewrote what it meant to rise without shouting. Because the strongest people do not always fight back. Sometimes they build something stronger than the hands that tried to break them. Clara stood on the hilltop. The sky above her vast and wide. The earth below her patient and kind. And in that moment she understood. She had not been sent here as punishment. She had been sent here to remember who she had always been. A daughter of dust. A guardian of growth. And no one, no matter what they said, could take that away. That winter the first snow came quietly. It blanketed the fields like a hush, soft, patient, undemanding. A clean slate drawn by the hand of nature itself. Clara stood by the window that morning, holding a warm mug between her calloused hands, watching the frost kiss the edge of the barn roof. It had been nearly a year. The farm was no longer a strange place. It had become her rhythm, her breath, her soil. She no longer felt like someone surviving punishment. She had become someone rooted, alive, and necessary. Tom had gifted her an old leather-bound notebook, filled with cropped notes, weather patterns, and pages stained with stories from years past. On the empty pages in the back, Clara had begun to write her own. Her handwriting now shared space with generations that came before her. She was part of something larger. One morning, Luke handed her an envelope. Quiet as always. Inside she found papers. Property records. Her name. Her name listed next to his. Co-manager. Inheritor. Clara stared for a long time. Her hands trembled. I haven't, she tried to speak. Luke just shook his head. You already have. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway with the weight of that trust pressed warmly against her chest. Later that day, Clara walked the familiar path up the snow-covered hill. Her boots left firm, determined prints in the fresh snow, like a quiet declaration. And when she reached the top, the hill welcomed her like an old friend. The land stretched out in every direction, endless, still, and breathing. She thought about the girl who had arrived with only one suitcase and 1,000 wounds. The one who used to lower her eyes at mirrors and flinch at kindness. That girl still lived inside her. But now she had grown roots and leaves and scars that told better stories. She had once been the subject of shame. Now she was the symbol of quiet strength. She smiled as the wind brushed her cheek. Because she knew this land had not broken her. It had remembered her. Helped her remember herself. They sent her to a poor farmer to be humbled. What they really did was set her free. They thought her weight made her weak. They mistook softness for fragility. But the truth? Clara was never the one who needed fixing. She simply needed space to breathe. Space to become. And on this land, quiet, wild, endless, she did not just find healing. She became it. Not just for herself but for everyone who had ever been thrown away.